objective this evening is to provide you access to some experts that work in all areas of the home buying process, including our team of realtors, which are milling about the room. Feel free to give them any questions that you'd like to, and they'd be willing to help you out any way they can, all right? Also here this evening is Bob Molta. He's the broker, owner of Real Living Realty Professionals. He's in the back of the room. He's our big boss. And Stephanie Lepsch, which is our operations director. She's also in the back of the room. So, after contacting us and starting your search, you need to explore banking. Our panel includes Paul Thorogood from Northpoint Mortgage, who has great news on the latest interest rates and programs available. Please feel free to ask him any questions during the Q&A or privately if you prefer, relative to your individual needs. We also tell all our clients, we are not experts in mechanical, electrical, or structural issues, including the foundation issues. Therefore, we cannot give you advice, other than we do strongly advise you to get licensed experts in any area of your home that you have questions about. And if you find you do have a problem, fix it or disclose it. If you've ever listed a house with me, you know my 3 favorite words are disclose, disclose, disclose. You're much better off doing that than anything else, okay? That brings us to the area of legal advice before, during, and after a closing. Attorney Scott McEwen, who was supposed to be with us this evening, unfortunately got a phone call on a very fatal accident, which he is now involved in. So he's unable to be here this evening, but he helps many buyers and sellers achieve a smooth closing. And please call his office if you have any questions relative to the legal portion of it. Again, information on the subjects of foundations is rapidly emerging, and scientific data is presently still being collected. To date, there are a lot of open questions. One of the leaders here in Connecticut doing the collecting and reviewing all that information is here on our panel this evening, Professor Jonathan Gorley from Trinity College. The state of Connecticut currently recommends that foundations built between 1983 and 2015 are evaluated by a Connecticut licensed engineer performing a visual and/or a core inspection. Unfortunately, Dave Sherwood, who was supposed to also be here this evening, was at a conference in Dallas and his flight was canceled. So he's not able to be here, but we have his representative, Godfrey Oney, who's going to have Dave on phone, and he will be speaking for us for a while, and he will also be available during the question and answer period, all right? And you can ask him anything. He's really an expert in many areas of a home inspection. The state has also recently mandated insurance companies to collect a charge from all Connecticut residents through their homeowners insurance to cover the repair fund set up by the state. Serge Morodoff is here. He's from Liberty Mutual. If you have any questions you'd like to ask him at any point in time, he's sitting over there with the suspenders without tie. Okay. Disclosure forms for buying and selling a home in Connecticut have recently been updated to increase the emphasis on this foundation issues. So we have included them in your packet as well for your review. Again, we're here to help and answer any questions that you might have and guide you through the whole home buying and selling process, but this evening is for informational purposes only. The best thing that you can do for yourself and your family is to remain informed and continue to educate yourselves as new information becomes available on this problem, okay? So we are now going to turn this over to Godfrey to get Dave on the phone, and he's going to speak to you for a few minutes, okay?
Dave, you're all set?
Yes, all set.
Can everybody hear him?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
All right, go ahead, Dave.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. I am sorry that I can't be there this evening, but as you heard, I'm stuck down here in Dallas for another day, and I appreciate the ability of technology so that I can at least be there in this form. So my company and other inspection companies and a couple of engineers that we work with have collected a lot of data over the time period since we have identified the concerns on foundations. In collecting that data. It's important as I start talking tonight that you understand, although these are our findings, they're not complete, and it's certainly not, as in the engineering world, we like absolutes, and we would love to be able to have enough data to tell you this will happen, this won't happen in absolute terms. However, what we can do is we can say that we're spotting trends, and some of the understandings and the characteristics of concrete itself, of building structures themselves, I understand very well. And so I can use that in my evaluation and analysis of these homes. And I've inspected some, certainly over 2,000 foundations to this point, and probably more than that. And so we're monitoring things. And one of the trends and things that we have seen is I have two particular houses that we have been watching, and core samples were taken of them and identified a very high percentage of peritite in the samples that were taken. And in monitoring it over the 9 years that we have, and each year I go back and look for changes and alterations, and yet there's no cracking and no changes to that foundation. Does that mean it won't in the future? Well, not necessarily. However, one of the things that we do know, and John Gorley there can really explain a lot of wonderful things in regards to peritite and its reaction, and so I'm sure he'll do a wonderful job there. But we're finding at that particular house, it's got very good drainage and very good water runoff away from the foundation. The foundation is dry. The seal, the foundation seal on the outside, has not broken down. And so there has been no cracking to that foundation to date. We have some other houses, one particular one that I inspected myself about 3 years ago, and found some cracking there, and went back about 3.5 weeks ago and found that there has been progression to that tracking. And so we also know that at times that there's some initial cracking. There was a house that I inspected about 5 years ago that had some mapping cracks to it, and that's what we call it, when some people call it spider cracks. When you get a reaction in the concrete and it causes these offshoot cracks, not just one crack, but typically multiple cracks off each other, and they're identifying those now as mapping cracks. When we see those mapping cracks, mark them, identify them, and then come back multiple years later and find either no change or some change and start to find out common grounds to it. And so one of the common grounds that we continue to come across is less water, less movement and cracking. More water, more movement and cracking. Now there is another piece to this, and that is, what was the concrete mixture like when it was first poured? If it is poured and mixed to the strength that it was intended, some 3,000 pounds of pressure on a residential home, then typically it stands up better than the ones we're finding that are less than 3,000 pounds, which again is teaching us that the more times that we see this, the more that we believe or understand the trend is showing us at this point that if a foundation was poured incorrectly and it was weaker, it responds or reacts greater. And so that causes more problems. Therefore, the predictability that people want, when people say, well, I want to know without a doubt that this foundation is going to move or not going to move, there is certain things that we can say, well, less likely if there is a water issue there, less likely if it was mixed or poured properly. Well, how do you know that? The best way to know that is to be able to, either look at the foundation by a trained professional, and in the state of Connecticut, they have two requirements. Either a professional engineer, a licensed professional engineer, or B, by a certified foundation specialist. And so we look for certain signs, coloration, density, cracks, and from there we can determine some of these things. And then of course we look at drainage and moisture permeation, humidity, and so on, so that we can determine things that are going on with the foundation and the likelihood, although it's not absolute, but the likelihood based on our findings to date that something may occur. So those are some of the trends and some of our findings. We have seen both foundations not cracked that have a lot of peritite, foundations that have a little peritite crack, and some crack and then never move more than that and never become a full failure in the engineering term of a foundation. And then we find some that that do crack and do fail and can no longer sustain the wood frame structure in place the way that it was intended to. So overall, to kind of summarize, we are starting to get more information and data by monitoring these trends that can certainly be helpful, but we don't have anywhere near enough yet to have absolutes, and I don't know that we will. I will also say that when this first came out, we believed it to be in a small area, and there were a certain number of towns that we thought we understood it to be. That's grown, and although it's grown and there has been some hype around it, I think that we're also starting to see, just like a pendulum swings, that it's starting to pull back, and the number that we originally thought isn't maybe quite so large as we thought it was. But what that number is, how many homes, we don't really know. We know that we have a procedure in place to inspect, a procedure to take core samples, a process in which people can apply for support from the state and get assistance both on the inspection end, the core sampling end, but also on the replacement end. And today, we have some wonderful choices about replacement of foundation, that it's not always just poured concrete, that we have 3 or 4 options that seem to be working very well, and when it's been engineered, have proven the test of time. So you have block foundations that have been around since the 40s and 50s and still standing. So for smaller homes that maybe they don't have quite the dollar amount, instead of doing a poured foundation, might make more sense to do a block foundation. As long as it's done properly, the blocks are properly filled with an insulation so that you don't get condensation and a rotting effect. Then you've also got the poured concrete, which is pretty common and typical. The challenge with that is once you pour concrete, it typically takes about 5 to 6 years for it to fully cure and settle into position. That being the case, once you put the house back on it, there may be some bumps in the road, some tweaking where doors might bind a little bit, windows might bind, where some adjustments might have to be made over that time period. And then the last one is the construction panels, precast panels. And those have been evaluated, engineered, used, and those seem to be doing very well. Less shrinkage, less movement, a little bit cheaper, but it all depends on the client and what they want and desire, and all of them are effective and all of them will work. So as those start being used and you get more contractors coming in on it, you'll see the prices drop a little bit. So we have some good news around this and some still unpredictability because everybody likes certainty. We just can't provide that full certainty. So that's what I have at the moment, and I'm certainly willing to field questions at the end and see how I can best help any of you.
Thank you, Dick.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, so our next speaker this evening will be Paul Thorogood. He's from Northpoint Mortgage. And because this is a full overall view, we want you to know that homes are still selling in our area. And so Paul's going to give you some good news about what the rates are today and what they're looking at as far as programs. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm from Northpoint Mortgage. We're a full-fledged lender. I've got the easy job tonight. It's actually great because this Crumbling Foundation, and I was a big part of it, and I was telling the gentleman over here that the Wednesday it broke, from a good friend of mine, Chris Colley out of WFFBC or wherever the hell he is now, he blew up a deal that we had that was closing Friday because it was so new to everybody. Everybody was concerned. No one knew what was going on. So basically what happened was it put a hold on everything. The deal never closed. There was core samples done. It actually was done correctly, and the person never wanted to buy the house anyway because there was that uneasiness about what is going on with this new issue going on. So that was Wednesday to Friday. From a lender standpoint, from a banking standpoint, and talking to my head of operations and head of all underwriting, she made it very clear. We have it easy these days when it comes to crumbling foundations. We're not looking for that. Our appraisers aren't looking for it unless it's completely obvious that there's a structural issue. We have relied on the state. The realtor boards have really come up. You'll see some of the disclosures that are in the package. You'll see that the realtor associations have really stepped up to the plate to really attack this with the state, with the help of the state, and with the help of engineers and experts and everything. So from a lender standpoint, we're not looking for it. If it's an issue, we're pushing it right off like we always would have to an inspector, foundation expert, similar to what David said earlier. So don't worry about the money. You just got to make sure that your realtor is on board with it. And that's, I think it's great that this is a good showing. I've been to 3 or 4 of these, and it continues to grow with everybody because it is something in this area and the outskirts that I know they're going to talk about that is important. I mean, it's a great time to buy. Rates, if you want to talk rates, come on over and see me. But I sat on a conference call with all the experts. We spend a lot of money with these experts to tell us kind of where the market's going to help our clients. And the bottom line is we feel they may go a little bit lower, they may not. Don't quote me on that. But right now it's a crazy market, especially going into 2020 with the whole political arena. Okay? So anybody has any questions, anything like that? I got it easy tonight, so I appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Okay, our next speaker is Professor Jonathan Gorley. He's from Trinity College, and he's done a lot of research on this. He's been very inspirational speaker. I've listened to him before, and he knows his stuff. So here you go.
Thank you, Kay. Thanks for having us all tonight, and thank you all for coming. I approach this problem from the perspective of a geologist. I'm a geologist at Trinity College. This problem is, in fact, a geological problem with the mineral pyrrhotite. And so what we developed at Trinity with my colleague, Christoph Geiss, is a rapid test for homeowners to determine if they have pyrrhotite in their aggregate. And there are some common questions that I regularly get that I'd love to share with you right now, because you might already have them. So to preemptively try to get some of those out of the way, the first question I often get is pyrrhotite in all rocks? And there seems to be a perception out there that it is, and that, oh no, don't get tested because it's in everything, and as soon as you get tested, you're going to be blacklisted. It's in fact, it's not in everything. We've tested now 300 homes in the region, mainly in northeastern Connecticut, some in other parts of the state, some in Massachusetts, and about 30% of the homes that we've tested to date are pyrrhotite free. Now, homes that are from this region and are known to have material come from Becker's Quarry, which seems to be the location that most of the pyrrhotite-rich rocks came from, most of those homes do have pyrrhotite in it. So our sample is a little biased in the sense that we are testing mainly homes that suspect they have the problem, or homes in the area that are part of home sales that want to know if they have pyrrhotite in their foundations. And if they know it came from Becker's Quarry and J.J. Modis, not always, but in most cases, there is pyrrhotite in the aggregate, but not the same amount. Dave alluded to this too, and there is some interesting data to suggest that there is a difference between homes that have low amounts versus homes that have high amounts. We too have tested homes that have high amounts that don't show signs of deterioration. We don't know why. There's probably all those sets of conditions that are going for it in terms of not manifesting the problem yet. And then there are homes at the low end of the spectrum that seem to have problems that look like homes that have a lot of pyrrhotite. But there is some separation in the data. There are blocks of homes that, when I mean blocks, I mean entire groups of homes at a particular pyrrhotite level that are really low in concentration, don't show signs of deterioration, and look very different than homes that are of higher concentration and do show signs of deterioration. There isn't some magic number where it changes from problem versus no problem, but there does seem to be some probability and risk that can be involved in this. And we're hoping from our data that we're generating that we're going to be able to come up with some probabilities of particular sets of homes that are going to be lower risk. And Dave was alluding to this as well, because I think, and what we've been trying to talk to with legislators, with lenders, with insurance people, if they're listening, we can probably find out if there are homes that are low risk. And insurance is all about risk. The problem with these homes that have pyrrhotite, even if it's a low amount and may never show signs of deterioration, still can't sell their house, because the public perception is that any amount of pyrrhotite is bad. And it might be for many of these homes. But if we can establish that there's a group of homes that are, for the most part, less likely to show signs of deterioration down the road, maybe an insurance company would be willing, or maybe they have to be forced to, provide an insurance product that a homeowner would purchase, kind of like flood insurance, some sort of rider, where they are insured for a particular low-risk home. This would then help thousands of homes that are at the low end of the spectrum be able to maintain their values. Because as you all know, homes that can't sell, they go to their town, they reassess, they don't have to pay taxes, towns are hurting, and that's going right to the state. But if these homes can all of a sudden have value again, and you guys can sell them again, we can maybe get to a place where once we fix all the homes that are really bad, we can actually protect the homes that aren't going to show a problem. And we're getting there, but it's murky, it's complicated, it's ambiguous in a lot of cases, but there is some interesting separation in a lot of these homes where statistically it should be able to be done. So that's what we're kind of working towards and we're pushing for, and we're hoping those that are good with statistics, those that are good with risk analysis would be willing to take our data, some of the other data that is out there that the state's collecting, and actually be able to do something useful with it. The other question I get is the difference between the different kinds of testing. Most all testing out there that's available to homeowners, is on the list of CROG's approved vendors list, are all great forms of testing. We do it differently than some of the other more traditional ways of doing it. The petrographic testing is the traditional way to test concrete, where you take a core, you slice it in half, you look under a microscope, and you actually count aggregate grains that have pyrrhotite. So you'll get something like 20% of the grains that they looked at have pyrrhotite. 30% of the grains that they looked at contain pyrrhotite. And the reports that come back to homeowners say those types of things. The numbers that come back from there are not direct measurements of pyrrhotite, but instead are what percentage of the aggregate particles contain pyrrhotite. Now, we approach it from a little different point of view. We directly measure pyrrhotite using a chemical and physical test, two different tests that come to the same answer. We're actually measuring directly how much pyrrhotite by weight is in the concrete, and these numbers are much lower. They tend to be on the order of 0.5%, 1%, and that's really high. 1 or 2% pyrrhotite in your foundation is on the higher end of the spectrum. The Canadians do a similar kind of analysis where they're testing the direct percentage by weight, and they have a cutoff of 0.23% where they give homeowners aid. Everything below that they consider to be not necessarily safe, but just a threshold for them to give homeowners aid for replacing their basement. So sometimes, because I've spoken to a lot of realtors, they ask me about a report and they say, we've had a report that says we have 20% pyrrhotite. And you look closely at it, and it's 20% of the particles that are in the aggregate contain pyrrhotite, whereas the direct measurement's a little different. So we try to compare and contrast when we can. We've had the chance to be able to test our method and then also compare it to a petrographer's report. And when they find it high, we find it high. When they find it low, they find it low as well. So we've been able to calibrate this a few times, and it's been helpful. So I'll stop there, and I'll certainly answer any more of your questions about the testing, about how pyrrhotite actually works as a mineral. It's very complicated and very interesting at the same time. And so thank you, and I'll pass it on to Tim. Yeah.
So our next speaker is Tim Heim. He formed the Connecticut Coalition Against Crumbling Foundations, and he's been very responsible with working with the state and getting us a lot of relief as far as these problems are concerned for people who already find they have crumbling concrete in their homes, which has been devastating for many home owners, as you can imagine. Unfortunately, Tim finds himself in that same condition. He has a home that has crumbling concrete, and he told me tonight he's raising it. As of April, he will be doing the new foundation. So here's Tim to tell you a story.
Good evening, everyone. You know, on my way over here when I was driving, I was thinking on how great of a job each and every one of you have. You know, you get to see when you sell somebody their house, their first house, how excited they are. And, you know, how proud they are. They saved all their lives to buy their first home. And that's pretty rewarding. But what you don't see is when somebody's told that their biggest investment is now worthless. And what you don't see is the tears and the stress that these victims go through every single day and night when they're told their biggest investment is now worthless. And it's devastating. I'm speaking firsthand. July 22nd of 2015, I'll never forget that day. George Colley said he did the first report on NBC 30, and a couple months prior to that, I was cleaning out my basement and noticed some cracking. You know, we all accumulate stuff throughout the years, more than others, and I noticed some cracking a couple months prior to July 22nd. Then when I saw the first story on July 22nd, then I realized that I have the problem. Get an engineer, and Sam, who's also in this room, sold us our first house on Village Hill Road, which was a good friend of the family. Hi, Sam. That was built in 1967. We should have stayed there. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. Should have listened to Sam. But we stayed there for 5 years, Wellington. I grew up at Summers. My wife grew up in Ellington. Our money went further in Wellington. Bought our first raised ranch, 1967. Lived there 5 years, bought bigger, better, newer. So we thought 4 miles up the street on Laurel Drive in Wellington. And when you find out and when you're told your biggest investment is now worthless, we did get a home inspection report. And 13 years ago, we had a visual home inspection report that said minor cracking was normal. Ladies and gentlemen, if you came to my house today, my walls are bowing in 1.5 inches. And it doesn't take an expert to tell you I'm up a creek without a paddle. So for the last 4.5 years, I started the Connecticut Coalition Against Crumbling Basements about 4 years ago, January of 2016. In July 22nd, August, throughout the months, nobody would return my call. And when I tell you nobody, nobody. I work third shift. I'm an operations manager, which I have to go to after I'm here. And I would get up around noontime and I would call you. I would call, if you're a congressman, if you're a senator, if you're a state rep, I'm calling you. And if you don't call me back, I'm going to call you again and again and again and again until you call me back. Joe Courtney was the first one in late August of 2015 to come to my home and look at the issue firsthand, and he's still in it today. So, you know, in the many signs that I've had made, many rallies I've organized, many meetings I've organized, actions speak louder than words. I've had people shake my hand and say we're going to help, and then you hear crickets. So we've come a long way. I don't want to talk, and I could talk about this all day, every day for the next year with you guys, because I'm very passionate about this, because we did nothing wrong. And it affects everybody in this room. And I'm sure many of you know somebody that has a crumbling foundation. And Canada, the symposium that I hosted a couple weeks ago, Canada's had 10 suicides over this. And that's gone up 5 since the 3 years that they came down and visited and supported us 3 years ago. So it's tough, and you guys see it and you hear it, what I'm seeing out there today. So I partnered up with Trinity, so I take core samples. And why I take core samples is because my house is going to cost $200,000 to fix. The state is coming up with some money of that, but I got to pay for the stuff that's not covered. So I started coring for Trinity, and I'm seeing a lot of things out there with a lot of people, and I get it because I'm a victim advocate. My best interests are the victims and the victims only. So I see a lot of things. An engineer and a home inspector can walk into a house, and they can tell you that you have the problem. And ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't take an expert. You guys could look at a half a dozen pictures and see the horizontal cracking and see what it looks like. And when a home inspector and an engineer could tell you if you have the problem, but what they can't tell you is that you do not have the problem. And what I mean by that is because it's science. And what I've heard from some potential home buyers out on the street is that they go in and the home inspector or the engineer says it looks fine, looks structurally sound, and they're right. But what they don't continue to do is to add that next sentence, that pyrrhotite, who knows if it's got pyrrhotite, and who knows what it's going to look like tomorrow. And that's the world we live in today. So potential home buyers are misinterpreting that it looks structurally sound today for that they don't have the problem. And in my opinion, that's misleading, because as a victim of pyrrhotite and as somebody that's been lost a lot of sleep and been dealing with this day and night for the last 4.5 years, I want to know one thing: pyrrhotite positive or negative. I want the sure thing. I don't want an engineer or a home inspector to tell me it looks good today, but they cannot on the dotted line tell you that there's no pyrrhotite in that concrete. It's science. Professor Gorley. Whether it's the Trinity testing or the petrographic testing, they both work. And like I said, you want to know if there's pyrrhotite positive or negative. I had that visual inspection 12, 13 years ago that said minor cracking was normal. Do I find fault on the homeowners prior to me or my realtor? No. Because it wasn't as well known back then. You know, today's a little different. If you're a realtor in Eastern Connecticut, if you're a home inspector, if you're an engineer, you know, or you should have known about crumbling foundations. You know, when we went to the symposium, and I just hosted the second symposium on the crumbling foundations, but last November, when I went to the Canadian Coalition Symposium, we had, I think it was almost 900 articles on this issue. So right now we're probably up to 1,000, if not 1,000 plus. And, you know, that's what's helped us get $180 million today. Because what's news today is forgotten tomorrow. So there's 1, 2, 3 stories a week on crumbling foundations. I know I just listened to, I think it was WNPR with Carolyn Lundstrom, Senator Anwar. They're still talking about Massachusetts is affected. So we have to help them help us. Sue too is here, and she's been very spoken and very supportive, and actually getting her house fixed as we speak. So congratulations to Sue. So folks, I appreciate you being here. You know, I really do. And thank you for coming here and trying to learn a little bit more about the issue, because with $180 million, everybody's an expert. Everybody's an expert. Experts are coming out of the closet because they're a home inspector or they know about the issue. Well, the only experts, in my opinion, in this issue is the people that are affected. They live, eat, sleep, and breathe this issue day and night. And, you know, it's devastating. And I appreciate you guys looking after your clients' best interest. But remember, you get a home inspector that comes into a home and you're walking through your potential buyer and they say, oh, it looks structurally fine today. The next question should be, is there pyrrhotite in that concrete or not? Because I will probably never buy a house in Connecticut again. But I don't care if I was in Connecticut, I'd get it core tested. And I don't care if there's a smidgen or a significant amount of pyrrhotite in that concrete. I want the sure thing. And the sure thing is you remove pyrrhotite from the equation, you remove the problem. So that being said, I'm open to any questions that anybody has. I appreciate your time. If you guys want to look at any and every article or interview that's been done, Connecticut Coalition Against Crumbling Basements on Facebook, if you haven't already heard of it. If you want to get a lot of good answers, there's also Stafford Area Crumbling Foundations. That's another good private site that you could speak your mind and know it's not going to get around everywhere, so that's good. So does anybody have any questions for me? Bingo.
You said you want to know positive or negative. But
That's correct.
the gentleman before, I think he said percentage matters too.
Okay.
But are you saying any percentage?
I'm saying that's right. And there's no one has come up with how much is too much.
That's correct.
Okay? So follow me. So nobody has come up with how much is too much. So yes, I want to know if there's a trace. I want pyrrhotite-free concrete.
So if I'm a homeowner and I have any trace of it, I can't sell my house?
That's correct. That's correct. And if you do sell your house, you have to disclose that. All right? I know there was legislation that was just passed through Governor Lamont. Something to do with the realtors, accountability with the realtors, also the homeowner. I think it's the realtors have to disclose it. Kay, you would know this better than, it's in your packet. So, and you know what, folks? Homeowners are skim coating. Homeowners are painting, filling in the cracks. Not every homeowner's honest. What's that?
Paint over concrete?
You can paint over concrete. Come to my house. I'll show you what the previous homeowners did. If you don't believe me, come to my house. And when you paint it white, the cracks really show up. Did you have another question?
Well, is your house appraised at less if you have any amount?
My house is worthless.
Right, but you have a high level of it.
I don't know what level I have on it. That's an assumption. I core test.
You have a core test in your own?
We did a little schmidgen. I tried core testing, and then what happened was it was just dust. Didn't even come out as a core. So that tells me there's a problem. The strength isn't that high with my concrete. So, and that's the challenge. And as Professor Gorley mentioned, the risk factor. So if a homeowner, and Dave Sherwood mentioned it as well, if a homeowner has a trace and it's built in the mid-'80s and the problem is affected homes between 83 and 2015, so say you have a house in 1984 and it's showing no signs, but yet it comes back with a trace of pyrrhotite. That's a low risk, I would think, a low risk house. I'm not an expert, and that gets me off the hook a lot of times because I'm not an expert. So that's where insurance could come in and really, really help out.
I heard one of the other speakers say that moisture comes into play. Now, is that just ground moisture? Or like if you have a house by a lake, would the ambient moisture in the air causing?
I'm not an expert. Let me pass you to.
Water is very important in as a catalyst the reaction. So it starts thinking water and air, both. So in fact, if you totally saturate concrete in water and don't let any air into it, it actually doesn't react. You need the air as well. So a humid climate is bad because you have water moving in and out of that concrete, whether it's through the ground or where it's through the walls and from the inside or from the floors. I mean, we live in a humid climate. You can't escape water. Can you slow it down? And certainly there are cases where treating the outside, and I know Dave can probably attest to this as well, and I've heard anecdotally that coating the outside of a foundation when it's known that cracks were started could slow things down a little bit. But for how long? Is 5 years enough? Is 20 years enough? And so, you know, when you're talking about trying to sell a house, does someone want to buy a house just because it was coated and it's going to slow it down and their basement doesn't have to be fixed next year, but it will have to be fixed in 5, 10, 20, 30 because we don't know how long that coating is going to actually. So that's the problem. Like, there are things that might help slow down the problem because you're limiting the water and air. You can't really limit the air, but I mean, limiting the water that's interacting with the foundation could slow things down. But to fully stop it, maybe in some perfect situations that could be possible, but I would imagine unlikely in the climate that we live in terms of the humidity. There were some septics that have some issues. I remember testing some septics early on, and septics have been affected, yes.
And been replaced.
Yeah.
On some listings I read, there's people who have cited things such as like category 1, category 2. Is that them essentially trying to talk about risk or?
No. Dave, are you still there, Dave?
No, let me get
No. Oh, okay, because I think Dave might be the perfect one to explain what a category 1.
So class 1, 2, or 3. So class 1 being the least worst. The second, the third
Is being the worst of the worst. Okay. Now the problem that we're running into is perception. So you and I go to the convenience store. Armed robber comes into the convenience store. Police are talking to you. Police are talking to me. What does he look like? You're going to say he has a beard. I'm going to say he was clean shaved and had a mustache and wearing shorts. So you get these engineers that are walking in that have seen 5, or you get an engineer that's seen, like Dave Sherwood, 2,000. Well, so now with seeing more, that's not as worse as the one where you only saw 5. So perception comes into play on something like this. So
Essentially, that's just based off of a visual inspection.
that's a visual inspection. So you
It
walk.
has nothing to do with
No.
amount or testing. That is purely a visual inspection because initially when the captive insurance group started coming online and giving out money, they needed everybody to get tested. Well, that was unnecessary in some of the most extreme cases, and it was homeowners that already had their walls caving in were required to get tested, and so that just didn't make sense. And so then they changed it to have this classification, and where the 3s being the worst didn't have to get tested, but 2 and 3s didn't have to get tested, and 1s, which I'm assuming, and Dave, you can chime in here too, are more ambiguous in terms of the amount of, it's ambiguous in terms of the cracking, not the amount, sorry. It's ambiguous in terms of the cracking that is seen and that core testing is recommended. But I've seen cases where inspectors and engineers with class 2s have also recommended core testing and that's where I'm unsure. And if Dave, if you can jump in, what's the difference between a 1 and a 2?
besides the.
Okay, so a 1 is when an engineer or certified inspector comes out, looks at the foundation, and identifies cracking related to peritite or no cracking related to peritite. But it has to be suspect or none at all. If they know positively because it shows signs of mapping, branching off, then it goes to a class 2 or code 2, as they're now calling it. So a 2 would represent that there is mapping cracks, and those mapping cracks are less than a millimeter wide and less than 20% of a continuous wall. If it's over that, then it goes to a 3. So at this point, a 1 is either no cracking or suspect cracks that cannot be confirmed. And that's when a 1 really is, if you need more information, you have to go to the core sample.
And ladies and gentlemen, let me just add this. There was a lady that was told she had the problem from an engineer. She got it core tested petrographically, it came back negative. So keep that in mind. A woman was told she had the problem visually, got it petrographically tested, and it came back negative. So, yes?
So John, I just want to clarify, right, just because for a couple of different things were said.
Sure.
When we're talking about class 1, anything, a foundation that, from a visual inspection perspective, the engineer doesn't see anything, it's still a class 1.
Well, see, and Dave, maybe you can correct me on this, because this is where the problem that I have. If I go into a house and it shows no signs and not even one crack, not even coming off the corner of a window, corner of a door, nothing, and I core test, then, and it comes back positive for peritite, then that's when people get classed, correct? Dave?
Say that again. If it comes back with
Peritite.
no cracking, no suspect cracking at all, then it is identified as a 1. Identified as a 1, yes, if people want to know more information, then they would go ahead and take courses. They don't necessarily have to, but if they want to know more about the future of that foundation, then they would need to go to a course center.
Well, if they want to know one thing, which is peritite positive or negative, that's what they do. They do the core testing, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, I will also tell you that we've had cases where people have cracking in a foundation and they take a core sample and there's no peritite.
Right.
Why? Well, because there's lots of reasons why foundations can fail. Long before this peritite ever became a concern, we had other reasons why concrete would fail. Plasticized cracks because it wasn't mixed right, too much water mixture, and not
Settling cracks.
too much drying agent. So, anyways, there are about a half dozen reasons why a foundation can crack and look very much like peritite,
Right.
and yet not be related to peritite.
Right. So would it be safe to say that somebody wouldn't be classed a 1, 2, or 3 unless they know if they're positive for peritite or not? Well, for the program, for the CIFSIC program.
That's not the way the indemnity company has set it up.
Set it up, yeah.
The indemnity company is making the assumption that if you have cracking and that cracking is mapping crack, then it's definitively peritite. I don't necessarily agree with it. We
Right.
have results showing that it's not. However, I also think that's why some of the towns like East Line and so on keep popping up on the map, because they may be related to ASR and not at all peritite related.
Right, I agree. I agree with you on that.
Of the 300 homes we've tested so far, there's not been a single home that has map cracking and doesn't contain peritite. That doesn't mean there's other ways, as Dave alluded to, other ways that map cracking can occur. There's something called ASR, alkali silica reaction, that does happen at the surface and can create map cracking. But so far, at least, all of the map cracking that we've seen in all of the homes that we've tested have always tested positive for peritite.
So identified pretty recently, Friday, I think, eventually. It doesn't look great.
But you know what, and let me just interrupt. If you have the problem, today is the time to have it. 4.5 years ago, believe me when I tell you, there was no money. And there was a lot of insincere I'm sorry's. So welcome.
So I have a list of questions, right? I'm going to limit it to 2. I'll ask them both. And so one question, a lot of data out there, right? 300 tests. I see UConn doing tests. My engineer came over, or I heard UConn was doing some kind of testing. My engineer came over. he's got data, you can answer after, but why aren't we sharing his data? We are all together.
We are.
Because it doesn't sound
So,
like.
yeah, so I can answer that. So the state, the Department of Housing, as well as the state geologists, are working together to compile all of this information in one repository to start working out all the things. It's absolutely being shared. We've done some collaboration with UConn, where we've shared some samples. We're trying to help them with understanding what they're doing as well. But there's absolutely collaboration. We're not working in different.
Well, that's great news, right? Great news.
Yeah.
And then my second question should be a quick one for you, I think. So I didn't have a lot of crack in it. I have iron stains on the outside of my foundation, and it was identified. You know what? That's pyrite.
Maybe. There's plenty of ways to get iron staining. There's plenty of iron-rich rocks in Connecticut. There's rebar pieces in concrete sometimes that can create iron staining. Iron staining alone isn't an indication of the problem. Now, what it could indicate is you have moisture moving through the concrete. So if you have moisture moving through the concrete and you have pyrrhotite, then you have the problem, and that's also going to manifest some other types of things like iron staining or efflorescence, which is white mineralization of calcium-rich minerals that are coming out of the concrete as water's moving through. So again, those by themselves aren't an indication of the problem. They are a symptom of water moving through concrete. Yeah.
Is Becker Quarry the only quarry that is involved in the
As far as we can tell at the moment, the majority, if not just about all of the homes that have this severe issue, were homes that were built from materials from Becker's Quarry, and J.J. Modis was the company that either owned Becker's or Becker's owned J.J. Modis, such that there was this close relationship and they were getting all the material out of Becker's Quarry. Geologically, there are rocks throughout the state that could contain pyrrhotite. Actually, all up and down through New England, there's sulfur-rich rocks that could contain some pyrrhotite. It's not unheard of to find traces of pyrrhotite in some rock aggregate all throughout New England. However, it appears that material out of Becker's was particularly rich in pyrrhotite, and because they used so much of it for so many houses in a part of the state that saw incredible growth from the mid-'80s until recently, that you had this perfect storm of bad material and a lot of building of houses using that material. So it's not impossible to find pyrrhotite outside of that, but there aren't other quarries, for example, that we know of at the moment that fall on that same geologic formation that would potentially have the same risk of pulling out material that is so high in pyrrhotite.
Because there's a strong belief like our
Can I add
Yes,
to that?
yes, please, Dave. Go ahead.
One of the things that's really important to know is because some people go back to their builder and try and chase it back, and they come back to me with photographs of, look, it wasn't J.J. Modis that poured it. That doesn't mean they didn't get their aggregate from Becker's Quarry. Not very often, but every once in a while, we're finding some cases where somebody had, say, 1 Manchester sand and gravel, kind of closed their quarry and switched over to builder's concrete. There seemed to be some period of time. We know that there was another concrete person when there was a trucking strike, pulled some from Becker's Quarry because it was the only place available to them. So there's been a few of those cases. So again, I just encourage you not to be pulling out old photos and going back on those photos because it could be a liability.
Yeah, and to add to that too, Becker's Quarry actually was mining 3 different rock formations. There's 3 different kinds of material that they were pulling, and still are, pulling out of there. So there are cases where if, they pulled material out from the non-pyrrhotite rich formation, mixed by J.J. Modis, poured into your house, could potentially have little to no pyrrhotite in it too. So it's not just one rock type, which complicates things. So there's not one perfect match or fingerprint always for Becker's Quarry, because a lot of the rocks, one, look the same, and they're pulling out multiple different kinds of rocks from there throughout history.
But, so he, at
Yeah.
any point, because that's
He-
where we believe our concrete came from, was Manchester sand and gravel.
Right. He's just saying that it doesn't rule out the possibility that some of the other concrete material producers didn't get material from Becker's at times. Is that what you're saying, Dave?
Yeah.
Right,
Okay,
right.
okay. Thank you.
I have a couple questions about the, like, if you're going to have the problem, now is kind of a better time though. So we've heard different things. That's one of the reasons we're here, is trying to get like straight answers on a lot of things. Is there a certain level of foundation damage that has to be apparent for state aid for repairs? Like in terms of class 1, class 2,
So they
class
are
3?
prioritizing it, as far as I know, and if anyone wants to jump in here, the captive insurance group takes a claim and looks at the class rating, looks at the photographs, looks at our reports if we provided a test, or if a petrographer provided a test, and they are trying to fix the worst cases first, as far as I understand. Is that correct? Right. Yeah, the worse you are, the quicker you're going to get money to get fixed.
How long do you think these funds are going to be around for them? Like, so if you have, you know, so if like there's minimal signs now and then 4 years from now your wall's bowing, is there still going to be Connecticut funds?
That's a great
Good
question.
luck. Probably, you know what, the challenge has for the last 4.5 years and will always be funding. Because not everybody cares about crumbling foundations. Not everybody thinks that they should be paying for this. And legislation and politics is tough down in Hartford, and $180 million. So what's $8.5 million we're going to see from the $12 surcharge start next year. I think that fixes 45.5 houses. That's nothing. So we're already through the 60 million of the 100. We got 40 million to go, which Governor Lamont said he'll commit to. Your guess is as good as mine, and that'll be behind. That's right. That's right. So, and that'll be beyond my time.
And then we've also heard rumors about FEMA involvement, because on top of it fixing your house, like all the damage to your land and everything of having the work done. Like, is that a real thing or a dream?
So,
or?
FEMA was at my house. And with politics being so split and so divided in D.C., and with Trump being so on the right and with Connecticut being so on the left, highly unlikely. I mean, sad but true. Politics are dirty. And
Joe Courtney is
trying. But Blumenthal and Murphy and Trump, and it's so divided, nothing's getting done. And so I would like to tell you, yeah, probably, but who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Maybe if there's a new administration next year, that'll be different. But anybody else have any other questions?
Is it only residential construction, or is it like bridges and other
So the way they make concrete for industrial use is different than residential. Residential is probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but the worst concrete. It's the cheapest. It's not reinforced. It's not, it doesn't have a skeleton of rebar. It's not poured at the same high pressure that is for big industrial jobs. No, and in fact, Willington last year had a bridge that was crumbling. It may have been in the news a little bit. They actually sent us samples. We tested it, and even though it was crumbling, it was totally clean. So. Tolland is tested. That is tested positive, and they're replacing the school. So it doesn't. It can still affect some concrete. It doesn't. It's not immune to it, I guess. But the DOT claims that they never used any material from there, and everything's fine in terms of the bridges. So.
We know from a commercial standpoint that DOH, Department of Highway, has articles going back to the late 1950s writing about peritite and its reactivity, going all the way down to Virginia. So it's not that uncommon. The difference is, as you were mentioning, John, the density and the mixture and the amount of rebar and reinforcement that's put in commercial and highway, of course, is much different than that of residential, because the amount of load that it carries is completely different than stick frame construction of a home. So it doesn't need to be the same strength that highways, commercial buildings, and so on need to be.
Yeah, someone had brought up the situation with Birch Grove being rebuilt because of the crumbling foundation. Now, Holland High School was built after that, I want to say around 2006, I believe. Do you know if that school's foundation was tested?
We didn't test it. That doesn't mean it wasn't tested. I don't know what Tolland's doing for all of their town buildings at the moment. We did test the firehouse. That's right. Yeah.
So there was a statement early on that talked about, the evolution of this problem and the understanding of it, where it went from unknown to great proportions, and it seems to be backing off from that number as far as the number of homes potentially affected. I think Dave mentioned. Yeah. So I was just curious about a little more detail on that.
Dave, did you hear that?
No.
The scope of the problem and how big it is, and you mentioned the fact that it might be scaling back and might not be as many homes. Can you elaborate on that a little bit and explain why you might think that?
Yeah,
Sure. So what I'm doing is I'm taking findings of myself, other inspectors, other groups of engineers that are doing evaluations on the foundations, and then in some cases core samples. And so we collectively have identified that the original numbers put out by whether it be the state or the media or somebody does not seem to be as large, number one. Number two, the other thing is I think it's extremely important that we don't panic, because panic just creates hysteria and bad decisions. Part of our findings, at least limited to what information I have access to. So it's important for us to know that it's a relatively small sample. So if you've got 20,000 people that think they're affected, and you find only of that 1,000 are affected, well, that's not a huge number, but that's 1,000 people that are affected. So I'm not saying those numbers are true. I'm showing it as a representative amount. We originally thought it would be a lot more, not just that had peritite in the foundation. This is where it's important. What we're finding is the number of times we identify peritite in the foundation and don't yet have any cracks causing failure of the foundation is greater than we once thought it would be on a percentage basis. And so when we sometimes take those core samples and identify, do compression tests on it and evaluation on it, we start to find that, well, this one here that failed is because it was mixed improperly to begin with and couldn't withstand the pressure it was intended. And then these here that could never fail. Is that true and going to hold up all the way? Probably not, but we see that's the larger trend than it was before. Well, we really don't see in the samples that we have, the amount of homes that we've evaluated, that trend would continue any differently. So to summarize it, I think that the number of failed foundations that we had concerns that could happen in the future is now being scaled down because it's proving otherwise in some cases, depending on how well that concrete was mixed to begin with. No different than if we look at commercial and how well that is mixed. And when you, instead of 3,000 pounds of pressure, 12 or 18 pounds of pressure, and yet it doesn't actually fail the concrete, but certainly it can cause cracking and falling and other such things. So if you don't have a lot of moisture getting into the concrete, and if it was mixed well, and if it has a smaller percentage of peritite in it, then it may react differently, and the trend is showing us to be true that it is reacting differently than higher amount with more moisture with a weaker mixture. That's all we're saying is that trend is showing.
Jonathan or David, just maybe there's a question you could answer that might be helpful for everybody. When you do a course testing or microscopic testing, other than the presence of parasites, what are some of the other important factors that are being referred to that you can actually discern in that testing that could end up becoming statistically relevant?
So I can only speak to what we do, and we are testing the amount and testing it fairly precisely. But we also collect a lot of metadata. We are not doing the engineering kind of strength test that Dave's talking about. We'd like to do that, but we have to destroy a portion of the core to actually test it. We have to powder it up, and so if there was a way to test strength first and then, but we don't have that at the moment. But we do collect information on drainage, on water issues in the house, and because water being a really important factor, we initially started by asking questions about, do you have curtain drains? Do you have gutters that are leaders that run away from the house? Do you run a dehumidifier all year round or just in the summer? Just to see if some of those water-related issues match up with some of the things that Dave's talking about in terms of these sort of different sets of parameters for particular homes that would lead homes to start cracking or not.
And if David maybe can answer the same question with the testing that he does.
So yeah, Dave, what other kinds of, other than positive, negative for period type, quantifying it, what other types of metadata or tests are you doing, is the question.
Okay, so what we will oftentimes do is take a look at the water seal on the outside of the foundation. So there are two types of sealants that have been used over the years. One is really a moisture barrier. It's not a full water barrier, and that tends to break down after about 20 years. Conversely, if you have a full water barrier that's rolled on, looks like a thick tar, that tends to have a lifespan of greater than 50 years. And so inevitably, if that's put on the foundation, we're finding much less moisture entry into the concrete. So that's one thing that we look at. Next thing we look at, I think as I was hearing Jonathan say, is the grading, the gutter system. The soil content is a big one. The more permeable the soil is, then the less likely is that if there's any water there, it's going to just sit and then penetrate the concrete. So looking at those things is another one. And then, of course, the stress test on the concrete would be another one. So those are the ones that we tend to look at most.
Any other questions?
The foundation being poured correctly, how can you tell?
Oh,
visually?
the question is, how can you tell the foundation's poured correctly? So there's well, I think I can answer this, Dave, and you can jump in too. The question was, how can you tell the foundation was poured correctly? Part of it has to do with water content. The water to cement ratio is important, and sometimes water is added to the mix more so than it should be to make it run a little further. And anecdotally, that was...
So there's two things. One is poured correctly, and the other is mixed correctly. So there are times when they don't pour the concrete correctly. In other words, a truck may back up, and they may empty that load, which might fill that foundation wall up to, say, a third. And then that truck takes off. How long is it between the time the first truck leaves and the second truck? And once they bring that second truck in and they start filling it up, are they mixing the two mixes? Because if you get a cold pour there, then you get water infiltration, and then you start having problems with movement. Hydrostatic pressure can create problems. So there's the mixture of the concrete, and then there's the blending of it as they pour it into the concrete. And then, of course, you've got no different than mixing cake. If you've got dry patches, what we call honeycombing, then those dry patches are areas where if it's very small, no problem. The larger it is, more likely you're going to get cracking. But many times that cracking is only localized and not something to fret over. If you get cracking that is elongated and branches off, those could be areas that could become problem, parasite related or not.
I mean, none of us were there when our foundations were poured, so I couldn't.
Right, so the question was, none of us were there necessarily when our foundations were poured, so what signs after the fact?
But remember, you want to know parasite positive or negative. Whether there was too much water or too much of this or too much of that, you want to know if there's parasite in that concrete or not.
All right, so now we're getting into me trying to train you guys to be up. It's difficult. It's not something I can give you a list and say, hey, go out and look for these things, because there's so many variables. And in the beginning stages, everybody thinks, once the foundation cracks, the cracks are going to be a ½ inch wide and the house is going to be moving as if it happens overnight. It doesn't work that way. On initial movement, you may get hairline cracks. And okay, are those hairline cracks vertical, horizontal, diagonal? Are they branching off of each other? Is there discoloration with it? Is there moisture related with it? Is there, when you look at the different pourings, is there a crack line there, what they call a cold pour? So there are so many variables. I would not want to tell somebody how to try and look at it to decipher whether it's parasite related or not. That needs to be left to the people that really understand foundations. Now, having said that, unfortunately, for a very long time now, there's been many professional engineers that are looked at as if they know what to look for. Even professional engineers will oftentimes admit they don't have a lot of training on concrete and its reactivity and its mixture. And so if they don't have that information and know what it looks like, they can misdiagnose it. And unfortunately, that's happened. So you really need to get somebody that's qualified, who has seen many foundations, to be able to get the right diagnosis.
And follow it up with a core test, because that's how you're going to know if it's parasite.
Honest to God. If you see horizontal and vertical cracking, look online and look and see if it matches. If it does, call an engineer. If you don't see any cracking, core test it. That's the sure thing. That is the sure thing. And that's what you want, is the sure thing.
So your recommendation would be to core test any house?
A house that you can't see any horizontal cracking, absolutely core test it. I wouldn't buy a house in Connecticut without core testing, because I want to know parasite positive or negative. Period.
No buyer should go in blindly and just assume that a crack that they see is part of the problem or not. Now, they can, again, full-blown problems are obvious, but a core test, no matter how you do it, whether you use Trinity, whether you use a petrographic test, that's where you're going to determine whether or not it's parasite. Now, again, we can't tell you what's going to happen in the future, and that's the challenge. But if you want to know if parasite's in the house and it has parasite and cracking related to it, the only way you're going to know that for sure is
science,
a core test.
And we
To be able to identify the
we
mineral.
want everybody to deal with somebody like Dave, who's a licensed engineer and will deal with a multitude of potential issues.
But there's also other people, engineers that are like it.
Yeah, but there's a list of people,
What's that?
Dave's one of them.
Somebody mentioned an approved list of.
Right. So the Capital Region Council of Governments, or CROG, has a approved vendor list of vetted, and we did this too. We submitted a application to explain why we wanted to be on the list, what we do, how we do it. And all of the folks on that list, it's not comprehensive. There's other people out there that might be qualified, but these are the folks that went through CROG, and they're listed on that website for not only testing, but for inspections as well as replacements. So that's a good place to go to shop around.
You can get to that in the package. You can get to that list. If you look at the website, and there it goes to the Connecticut website, which goes to the central capital region
Of government.
of government.
Right.
And you can get to that through the packages that we put together.
And you can get $400 back of that. So now that there's money available, that 400 that people were charging is now 800, or now it's 900. So when I sat down with Governor Malloy, that's the only thing he gave me, is a visual inspection. So he was gonna, for 2 cores up to $2,000, you get 50% back from the state of Connecticut, okay? So now, if you're gonna go above and beyond, if you're gonna do 2 cores and you're gonna go petrographic, it might cost you $2,500, $2,800. But remember one thing, anything above and beyond $2,000, you're paying 100%. And you're not getting 50% of that back. You're only getting 50% back up to $2,000 for 2 cores, okay? Trinity's test, $1,900, you get $950 back from the state of Connecticut. Mike Dion, and I want you guys to hear this again, Mike Dion from Manchester is still charging $400, okay? I respect that. You know, I don't mind if you make $1, but $1 million I have a problem with. So Mike Dion's a name that I'm gonna throw out at you guys, and I don't normally do this, but he's what's that? He's a nice guy. He's a great guy. He's an engineer. You've talked to him too. And Dave Sherwood as well, he's good too. But just beware. Just beware. That's all, guys. And again, go on the Connecticut Coalition Against Crumbling Basements. If you guys have any questions, the experts are the people that are victims. We're looking out for each other. So the good experience and the bad experience will tell you. We can't go out. The problem that we're having now is there's too much work and not enough contractors. I saw pictures today on your page about that's scary. That's very scary. So victims need to protect victims and move forward with that. Does anybody have any questions before I go to work?
I actually have a question.
Oh.
Thank you. And I'm sure this question has probably come up prior. I'm sure this probably isn't the first time you've been asked this, but when I think about a quarry and being the Becker Quarry and running a business and having this issue from this year to that year, why isn't that we can't go back to their records to say, from this year to this year, here are all the homes where foundations were poured, and proactively be able to see where these foundations are at before they become a problem. They were running a business, and I'm sure this question has come up before, but it's my husband and I were just talking about it and saying, how is it that we're waiting for it to become a problem without getting ahead of it?
That's a great question. I wish I had a simple answer because nothing about this crisis is simple. But the truth is, they had a fire. Like Sue said, they had a fire that was never reported and the fire department never responded to. But they had a fire. I'm not saying that they did or didn't. Okay, no, I'm just saying they had a fire.
It's the elephant in the room.
Yeah, it's the elephant in the room.
So I have another question. So in this window of time, there are so many houses built. Should be pretty reasonable to understand in this region how many houses were built. How many quarries were there? I understand that, but we're talking about, this is where when I hear it's 10,000 houses. So if there was 35,000 houses built, that meant 1/3 of all the houses built had aggregate from that strain in that quarry?
You gotta understand that Modus was cheap. So a lot of the builders,
I get it.
you exclusively,
But what
I
I'm-
think it was $2 a yard cheaper than everybody else.
I understand, but my point is that this should be data that's able to be put into a spreadsheet to say, here's the number of houses, here's how much aggregate was pulled out of all these different quarries, here's how many quarries there were, 100 million pounds of aggregate was pulled out, whatever the number is, and this amount of it came out of theirs. So here's the number of houses, and there's a percentage. We should have a pretty firm grip on the number of houses.
And in theory, and in the total number of houses, you're right, and it's been reported in the press that 35,000 homes were built in this area. To be able to break it down, though, you need records. You need to know that it came from Manchester or it came from Modus. And if you don't have those records, it's hard to actually
Do we know how
To
many
break-
quarries there are though? Was there 3 or 5 or 7?
That's about right. I mean, no, seriously, it is about right. It's not 20 quarries. It's probably 3 or 5 or 7. Yeah.
What about the building departments at all the town halls? Don't they have the records of what was
I don't know that. You say no. Starting to break it down now. Starting to break down.
So Michelle, your question was about the town law and records?
Yeah,
We really,
building permits, don't you have all that information there?
most of the town halls do not have building permits to that, they have building permits. But you may find out who built the home. I've rarely been able to find me a builder yet that would be able to get the records they support the concrete.
That's like asking, do you know every electrician that wired every home?
So the
If the
answer
subcontractor.
is no. We've not found a record yet. The only time we've been successful in finding out who poured the concrete is if the homeowner happened to have the information.
Right.
That's the only time we've ever been. We've called multiple builders, and there was a builder that I called that said they had records. So, I mean, you can infer from what we like, but that's the facts that we're dealing with.